Thief, please help me. Little black thief is running in the park. She was accused of stealing. There was a handsome number of policemen in the park. A white lady accused a black boy of stealing her PS5. The people in the park began to chatter. Suddenly, there was a sharp sound of screaming from the child. There was a crowd, and it seemed that something quite terrible was going on. A man stood forward to offer his help. What he saw was an end to the humanitarian. A policeman was dragging the little boy with him. He seems to be 11 years of age. By now, racism was reaching its extremist state. The man inquired the policeman why he was taking the poor boy with him. The little one was briefing that he was not a thief. The woman has accused him of theft. The boy's statements were entirely justified, but the lady's evilness was quite exclusive. She was a lawyer and defended her beautifully and convinced everyone that the little boy was a thief, and he was making up the story of owning this PS5. Excuse me, ma'am, do you have any of the proof against the little man? The man in the park asked. His name was Josh. Yes. This is the payment slip for my stolen PS5. It's convincing now? The woman asked with an aggressive tone while holding the PS5. At this moment, there was a harsh silence in the park, and the origin of suspicion turned towards the poor boy named Baldwin. Josh went silent, and then he whispered something in his ears. The woman is right. The collective voices of people merged in the playground. These Africans deserve this. Get back to your poor land. You thief, rascals, poor mates, get back to your rubbish towns. You won't deserve PS5. Get away. Take him to the police station. Lock him up. There were hundreds of voices, and each of the statements merged, and there was a single conclusion of all to lick the boy behind bars and give him a harsh punishment. The little man was scared, and he began to cry. He knew that there was no one to save him by now. Taking advantage of the whole situation, the white policeman dragged the boy to his car and took him to the police station. The entire incident happens on 89th Street in North California. The woman who accused the boy of stealing his PS5 was a lawyer by profession, a divorced woman, and incredible features with sharpened eyebrows, flattened cheeks, black eyes, and shoulder-cut brown hair. This is Jenny. Jenny was one of the famous and highly experienced lawyers who held the potential to win consecutive cases in a row. Her winning statements in the courtrooms were a powerful inclination in his career. Whatever happened in the park, she did it on purpose. Practicing manipulating statements outside the courtroom was her pleasure. She seeks pleasure by manipulation and lets people suffer from her evil acts. And this time, the unlucky Baldwin was her target. The police took him to the police station and filed a complaint against him. Baldwin will need a lawyer to defend him in court after dealing with the whole situation. These days, there was an extreme emphasis on the purification of the state, which means the authorities were taking some preventative measures to free their areas from the black people. For centuries, color distinction and racism existed, and it is justified to say that the concept has been rooted in the culture, and that extremism is justified enough. One of the police officers asked Baldwin to call for his parents so they could proceed with further legal confrontations. At the same time, Jenny was preparing some legalized documents to keep the little boy in his place. She was also one of the extremists and was constantly supported by the higher authorities of the state. Thanks to the professional acquisition of Miss Jenny, she managed to keep the boy behind the lockers for 2 days. While Baldwin told the police officer many times that he isn't a thief, Baldwin called his Uncle Jay. He was a co-worker of Jenny, a handsome young man who stole her heart quite long ago. Their relationship won't last long, but their career demands them to be best friends on Jenny's side. This wasn't the actual reality. She wants revenge, and when one of her spies at the police station tells her that poor Baldwin is their nephew of Jay, well, that's a bonus, Mr. Jay. Time has arrived when you will pay for the deeds, Jenny said to herself, with a mimicry smile on her face. She knew that she wouldn't keep the boy inside the locker for so long. There was a need to make a story or a shred of evidence against him. She locked herself in the room and began outlining possible ways to help her torture the little one and his uncle in the jail. This is the right time to put the sharp, intelligent Jay in his place. Jenny made a call and asked the higher authorities for help. She ended up the call, and there was someone at the door. The bell was ringing so abruptly that someone was there in quiet haste. Jenny turned to open the door. No one except a parcel mentions her name. Dear Jenny. Quite suspicious, she said with a confused tone. Rolling her eyes at the parcel, she managed to pick that up. It was the heaviest one. She dragged the package to her living room. It was dark at night, and someone left at the door just like that. She was curious about what would be in that package. Opening the box, she found bubble wraps, many wraps, and a heavy tape recorder with some files. An envelope of pictures and some payment slips. She took them all to her study room to examine what they were. Running through the files, she went pretty aggressive. On the last page, there was something written for her. Dear Jenny, you don't know me and never will. I have been keeping an eye since you moved into this house. There is some great information that might help you to get to know about yourself. Hey, don't get that furious. You look like a pumpkin when you get aggressive. There is a small gift for you. Just open the envelope. What the hell? Jenny said, and she threw that file on the floor. There was a piece of sensitive information about Jenny's career, her family, and how she takes privilege from men. She took that picture envelope, and there was a row of higher authorities, and Jenny showing a costly romantic view. Who could it be? Jay? I will burn down the person who is after me. She called the police station, and they informed her that they had released bail for the boy, as there was no other evidence against him. The court has ordered you to run a case against you for manipulating everyone at the playground and making the poor boy suffer. Further, the policeman added that the jury had immediately canceled her license, and he hung up the call. Jenny was devastated. There must be a strong alliance with Jay or the boy. There must be someone who has messed up with the whole case. But who could it be? Jenny was collecting her thoughts. Laying in bed, she couldn't even sleep for a moment as her mind was preoccupied with horrendous thoughts. The following day, there was an exclusive headline about Miss Jenny, how she cheated on her husband, and her evil ways to win every case. She seduces prosecutors, and that's how she gets privilege. The person against him was using her weaknesses. A day before a license was canceled, her image deteriorated into fine pieces the next day. She was furious and could feel her heart pumping. How was she going to face the whole world? There was again someone at the door. Jenny collected her courage. With heavy steps, she opened the door. There was no one, and again a parcel lying in front of the door. She picked up the package and placed it in front of herself. While attending to thousands of thoughts in her mind, she opened the box, and a letter was beautifully packed inside the brown square package. She opened the letter, and it said, Dear Jenny, I am so sorry that I visited your study room last night and left without a goodnight kiss. I missed that, but I was in a hurry, as I emerged to collect your files and some information that would help me understand what sort of lawyer you were. I am not Jay or any of your lovers. You will soon meet me, I promise, sweetheart." Terror was reflecting on her face, and she tore the letter down into tiny pieces. "There is something I should have to do." She went to the study, and there was not a single file of hers or the ones she received yesterday. She returned to the living room and gathered the tiny pieces of the letter with a sellotape and took it as evidence to the police station. This evidence wasn't enough to file a case against the unknown blackmailer. The policeman assured them that they would look after it by themselves. Everyone on the street was staring at her, and there was gossip among the public about her changing men every night. On her way back, she saw that her house had been burnt. She got herself panicked and asked the neighborhood to help her. There was nothing left for her. Suddenly, another mysterious letter caught her sight, hanging on a tree. "Jenny, this is all that you deserve, accusing my son of nothing. This is your destiny, how you misused your power to please yourself. Now you have nothing except your ego and your internal rage towards black humanity, and your career has vanished. I hope you will learn a lesson." Jenny took that letter and left the town. From that day, no one knew where she went. Racism and discrimination are society's evil elements, and many innocent lives have suffered from this.
Muffin arrived at the school later than the others. She was undergoing a challenging course of treatment. For several years, was homeschooled. By this time, the children at the school had managed to become friends. The class developed their relationship, and the first love couples appeared. Brian was in love with Emma and sometimes walked her home. Paul was inseparable from Anna. Steve spent a long time unsuccessfully courting the class's top hottie, Sophia. However, all the boys loved Sophia, even from other classes. She was beautiful, blonde, with green eyes. Sophia was not very successful in her studies, although she was very successful with the boys. She was the recognized queen of the class. On that day, two students, Muffin and Fred Crane, came to the school. Fred immediately attracted the attention of the entire class. A humble guy with dark hair and a friendly smile, whom both teachers and girls and even boys liked. He was well-versed in all the lessons, was polite, friendly, and did not participate in conflicts. He treated all warmly and affably. Surprisingly, he did not pay much attention to the beautiful Sophia. The queen of the class is accustomed to the increased awareness of boys. She wondered why the new Fred was friendly to Lisa, Stephanie, and Judy. He treated Sophia like everyone else, warm, kind, and nothing more. In the beginning, Muffin didn't even attract the students' attention. Everyone was busy discussing Fred's appearance and preparing for Stephanie's party. Muffin was sitting next to Fred. Two new students sat together, but did not pay attention to each other. It is not surprising that no one remembered Muffin. No one knew her name, although teachers approached her. A lumbering body, fat legs, thick cheeks, and colorless hair. That's what the new girl looks like. She didn't bother anyone, answered the teacher's questions, and didn't talk to anyone. The nickname, Muffin, stuck to her at once. No one remembered that the colorless girl was called Heather. She did not interest anyone. Soon it turned out that Heather had unpleasant breathing. When she was anxious or rushing, she began to breathe unnaturally. The girl put a tube in her mouth during the attack, restoring her breath. This caused her to be squeamish. She was called a muffin because of her loose body and plump face. At first, everyone was indifferent to her. Her classmates simply did not notice her. The situation escalated when it became clear that Fred was sympathetic to Heather. No, he was not in love with her. It was impossible to fall in love with a loose, colorless creature with unpleasant breath. But he treated her well. The girl could easily share her school supplies if Fred didn't hear the assignment. Some topics that Heather didn't understand, Fred could explain to her. It wasn't friendship, but relations with her desk mates were good. The beginning of the feud was Sophia. A pretty girl in the class could not forgive an ordinary girl for the attention of a good guy. One day, Sophia offered Fred to sit next to her in class, but the guy refused. He politely replied that he had arranged with Heather to do a joint project. Beauty harbored evil. From that moment on, Heather was no longer just an unremarkable girl. She became the true enemy of the class queen. You can't say that Sophia was madly in love with Fred, but the friendly guy turned out to be inaccessible to her. He was not under the spell of the beauty. He communicated with Sophia just as he talked to Stephanie, Anna, Emma, and even Muffin. One day, the first unpleasant situation occurred. That day, Sophia was in a perfect mood. She was wearing a bright red sweater and blue jeans. These clothes suited the girl very much. The beauty had a good mood. On this day, she was in the mood to joke about Heather. "What is it?" said Sophia, and she poked Heather's backpack with a delicate finger. The girl looked timidly at the queen of the class. She did not understand what the angry beauty wanted from her. Sophia squeamishly poked her knapsack with her fingernail. "It's mud," she said, ringing and laughing. The other guys were laughing too. "That's not dirt," said Heather quietly. "There you go, mud. It's like dough." Sophia kept laughing. Her beautiful eyes were shining. The laughter was ringing. At that point, she was more beautiful than usual. "Bread dough," Steve laughed angrily. Everyone liked the joke so much that laughter filled the audience. Heather became worried and began to breathe heavily. She was depressed and hurt. Fred did not laugh with everyone, but did not stand up for the girl. When Heather began to suffocate, Sophia began to intimidate her. She stuck out her tongue and began to breathe loudly. The guys started to laugh even more. "Dough for Muffin! Dough for Muffin!" said Steve. The other guys started shouting that phrase too. Fred got a little confused. He was uncomfortable with the situation. Fred felt terrible for Bread, but could not stand up to the whole class. He thought he should have supported the poor girl, but he didn't know how to help her. Fred was scattered over the books on his desk. The girl got better. Soon the lessons began. Fred couldn't concentrate on the task. He thought Heather was mad at him. "She'll probably never talk to me again," the guy thought. He didn't know if it was good or bad. Sometimes he regretted getting so close to Muffin. Befriending an outcast girl robbed him of many joys. But he couldn't break up with her. Somehow she touched his heart. Muffin was very different from the other girls of that age. She was kind and understanding. She made him feel comfortable. Like the other boys at school, Fred liked Sophia very much, but something about Heather made her tender and made him want to take care of her. He didn't want to take care of Sophia. Fred sat the whole lesson and did not look at Heather, but at the end of the study, he felt her hand touch his elbow. "Fred, I've lost my pencil. Can you give me yours?" Heather whispered. A wave of relief came over Fred. He was happy that the girl had found a reason to talk to him. He gladly gave her a pencil and crossed her eyes. Heather was smiling. He wanted so much to do something for her, and soon he had an opportunity to do something good for her. Unfortunately, good intentions have come to naught. There was a lot of talk in class about Stephanie's party. A classmate was gathering guests at her house for the weekend. Her parents left town and let her daughter call her friends. Stephanie gave everyone a bright invitation card. Muffin and Fred got invited too. Heather was holding a colorful card. Fred heard the girl sigh. "Do you want to go?" he asked the neighbor with a smile. "No, of course," said Heather sadly. Why? Said Fred. In his head, he scolded himself for asking. He understood that the gentle, shy girl with her appearance should not have come to the party. There were going Sophia, Emma, and Anna. These are real sharks that could hurt vulnerable Heather. At the same time, Fred understood how much she wanted to have fun. After all, this has never happened in her life. Perhaps she wanted to wear a beautiful dress and have fun with friends. She just did not have any good friends, and she deserved fun and some friends. Come with me, Fred asked the girl, looking into her eyes. Heather's cheeks were covered with blush. She looked at the boy with huge, colorless eyes, with wonder and hope. At that moment, she was almost beautiful, but after a second, the hope in her eyes disappeared. The girl mentally returned to reality. Thanks, Fred. I'm not going, said Heather, pretending to read. The boy felt a strong desire to make the girl happy. He thought that if Heather came to this party, the guys would see her qualities. They would appreciate her kindness and sincerity. He determined to help Heather. You're coming with me, and it's out of the question, said Fred firmly. And then he added, I want you to wear the most beautiful dress. Do you have one? Yes, actually, said Heather with a happy smile. Sometimes she was invited to holidays, but when she refused, no one insisted or talked her into it. On that day, Stephanie Adams' house was full of young guests. Loud music was playing. Sophia came in a bright green dress. It was very shining in her emerald eyes. The figure of the girl was great. The guys looked at her shapes with lust, but she did not pay attention to anyone. Sophia had a clear plan to get close to Fred. She was sure that the obstacle to their love was Heather. He spent so much time with an unattractive, ugly, pity girl from a pitiful school. There was simply no way to communicate with Fred without her in class. Today is a great chance because there will be no ugly muffin next to him, thought Sophia. She was beautiful today. Sophia was sure that Fred would come. He was a little late. The guys were all gathered and making a lot of noise. Sophia looked at the door. She was waiting for Fred. No one was expecting what happened next. Amid the fun, Fred entered the house. He was wearing a suit that suited him very well. He was holding Heather's hand. All the guys looked at the strange couple with surprise. The muffin looked strange. The dress was beautiful, but not very good for a total girl. The makeup was not on her. Her hair was neat and attractive, but colorless. Heather smiled affably. Her smile was timid. Stephanie was surprised, but invited the guests to join the company. The first half hour was good. Everyone continued to do their business. At first, no one noticed the queen of Sophia's class was in a bad mood. Fred never left her side, serving her drinks and sandwiches. He even tried to involve a shy girl in the conversation. It was time to dance. Fred was going to invite Heather, but Sophia was cleverly ahead of him. She went up to the guy and asked him to dance. Heather nodded timidly. The whole dance, Sophia snuggled up to the boy. He liked her. He didn't want to turn into a timid admirer of the entourage of the recognized queen. Fred mentally noted how beautiful Sophia was today. She was so temptingly snuggled up to him. He did not notice that the dance was over and the next song began. In the second slow song, he danced with beautiful Sophia. At the end of the second dance, he thought he did not want to return to Heather. He even regretted taking her with him on such a day. She prevented him from having fun with her presence. He could dance and have fun with the beautiful Sophia. Instead, he had to take care of Heather. Fred apologized to Sophia and went to Heather. Steve approached the beauty. He had long been in love with Sophia, but resentful, Sophia pushed the guy away. Can't you see that your Fred is stuck to Muffin? He doesn't want you, he said to Sophia. This was the humiliation the girl could not stand. Sophia jumped up to Heather and yanked her arm, screaming, "Why did you come to this party? You were not expected here. You are an ugly, stupid creature." All the guys began to look at what would happen next. Heather looked at the furious beauty. Sophia continued, "You're ruining everyone's life. Scary people like you should stay at home and not go to cool parties." Heather got excited. She started to breathe heavily. Fred helped her take the medication to help her live. He gave her the tube. All the guys were looking at him. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't respond to Sophia rudely. He didn't want to take care of Heather anymore. She was really in his way. She was a stranger at the party. But Fred wasn't mad at himself for bringing a girl with him. He was angry with her. She was breathing so severely, her ugliness didn't even save a beautiful dress. Heather's breath was back to normal. What happened next surprised everyone. Heather got up, looked at everyone with colorless eyes, and said quietly, "You're all evil, cruel people here. I came here only because of Fred. He is the only kind and noble man among you. I will leave, and he will leave with me. I am happy at your school because I met this guy. He is not like you. When we graduate, he will be married and have many beautiful, intelligent, kind children." At first, they listened to her in silence, but at the end of her speech there was laughter. Sophia burst out. Her laughter was loud and contagious. Then Steve and Stephanie and the other guys started laughing. Fred was silent. The guys weren't just laughing at Heather, they were teasing him too. They mocked him because of Muffin. Fred jumped up and yelled at Heather, "Shut up! Shut up! You are a stupid, disgusting creature. Shut up! I only brought you here because I felt sorry for you. Look at you. You're ugly and stupid." Heather fell silent in fear. Then her breathing became uneven again. She was helping herself breathe the drug, but it was no longer helping. The girl began to suffocate. At first, everyone laughed at her situation. The shortness of breath of a fat girl looked funny. Someone even mimicked her. Emma was the first to notice that Heather had become quite ill. She called the ambulance. An emergency came quickly, but the girl was already unconscious. Heather was taken away to hospital. No one knew what happened next with Heather. The next day, she didn't come to school. She didn't go to school with the guys anymore. No one even talked about Muffin anymore. It became taboo. All the guys understood they were involved in something terrible. The years passed, and everyone slowly forgot about the colorless girl. Fred and Sophia became a couple. After graduation, they married. Sophia was a demanding girl, and her young husband did not have enough money for her desires. She constantly talked about him finding a job. The relationship between the couple was not always perfect. The young wife was scandalous and capricious. Soon, Sophia came home with flaming eyes. The prestigious company was recruiting young employees. Sophia forced Fred to submit his resume. The girl sent her resume too. Working in a prestigious company was very well paid. If they could both get a job at the office of this organization, they could buy a house right away. Unfortunately, no one replied to their CVs. Sophia wrote letters to the organization, but the company sent them a polite refusal. After a month, a persistent girl still managed to get a meeting with the head of the company. Sophia was convinced that she and Fred were skilled professionals. She believed that ordinary people were mistakenly refusing them. At the interview, Sophia and Fred came together. The organization was located in a beautiful building with modern renovations. The guys were taken to a luxurious office to the head. A beautiful young woman in an elegant costume, offered Fred and Sophia a gesture to sit down. Something subtly familiar was on her face. "My name is Heather Donnelly. I am listening to you," said the lady. The name also seemed familiar to the guys. Sophia immediately presented the documents and began to tell the company director about their capabilities. She spoke for herself and her husband. Fred was silent. Sophia said a lot. Heather Donnelly listened to her attentively. "Why are you so silent?" said Fred's lady with a smile. With that smile, she turned everything upside down on him. He recognized Muffin. But how did she change? She became subtle, graceful. It was an impossible change for her. The face was hers, but at the same time completely different. She had a lovely look with expressive blue eyes. Her hair was blonde in a sharp bundle. Fred was struggling to breathe. Heather Donnelly asked anxiously, "Are you all right, Mr. Crane? Are you having trouble breathing? Should I call our doctor?" Fred shook his head negatively. His breathing was still heavy. Sophia was displeased that her husband looked so ridiculous at the time. "I had an asthma medication with me years ago, but I don't need it anymore. So if it's hard for you, I can call our doctor. Unfortunately, I don't have any medicine with me," the manager continued. Fred refused help. He was distraught. He remembered everything. He remembered the naive, ugly Muffin. He remembered how Sophia was torturing her. He remembered betraying a quiet, humble girl. "Heather," he whispered. The wife glanced at Fred angrily, and at that moment, she also got struck. Sophia's face turned red. "Muffin," she whispered. Heather smiled with restraint. "Yes, we know each other, and now, unfortunately, we do not need specialists for your profile. Our staff is already sufficiently staffed. We hired employees with higher qualifications, but you were so persistent, I can only offer you a position of service staff, but I think you will decline." Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. "Of course we won't take it," she roared. She was a qualified professional. Heather dared offer her the role of a maid, cleaner, or dishwasher. Sophia jumped out of her chair and ran to the exit. She gestured to Fred. Before leaving, Fred met Heather's light blue eyes. Her gaze expressed pity. There was no past resentment or anger in that look. But there was no longer the trust that Fred had in her many years ago. She forgave the betrayal. Fred was struck with terrible remorse. The couple was driving home in a taxi. Sophia hissed angrily at her husband. She was furious that a former classmate had done this to them. She was even angrier that Muffin had become successful and beautiful. She even thought that Fred's feelings for Heather had been awakened. And Fred rode in silence. His soul was tormented with remorse. He saw and remembered those blue eyes. He knew he would never forget them again. And Fred knew he'd never be able to look at his wife with love again. In the group, no one but Emma's girlfriend spoke to her. You can say they used her for their purposes. None of her classmates respected her. His name was Jason. He was a bully. The girl rejected his attempts to talk to her, because a rich guy would never love such a gray mouse. And it was true. He had an adult interest in her. Fearing it, she constantly avoided contact. But it was hard because they were in the same class. He had no other choice but to track down Barbara's apartment. He started guarding her at the entrance. "I thought I'd drop you off at school." The girl was upset when she saw her classmates in the yard of her house. To escape from Jason, She was ready to be late for the lecture. After all, he did not miss a skirt. The girl did not want to mess with him. Barbara, the granddaughter of Professor William Johnson, did not want to embarrass her grandfather, who did not give her any privileges, although he taught her. How did he know my address? She was outraged by his behavior, but Jason continued to argue that he cared about her and had the most sincere and warm feelings for her. Listen to me, Jason. I know you haven't missed a skirt in our department, or maybe you just collected them, but that's none of my business. Her eyes were filled with fear and rage by saying these words. Poor Barbara, if only she knew what she was going through. At this time, the professor continued to lecture in a quiet, monotonous tone. His attention was drawn to the fact that half of the lecture was absent. There was no Barbara. A knock on the door interrupted the teacher. Sorry, I'm late. The old man's stern voice. Why? The girl was scared because it had never happened to her before. She always followed strict instructions, and her grandfather sat in front of her. I overslept, said Barbara timidly. Next time, set the alarm, and you get 2 additional questions on the paper as a punishment. The class laughed. The quiet one came. The boys immediately began to make silly jokes. They didn't stop even though she was the most beautiful girl in the class. She had the only friend in the department, Emma, who always came to her rescue. Everyone else did not like her because she was the granddaughter of the most famous professor. Her father and mother died years ago. She was a total orphan. Her upbringing was her grandfather. She barely had enough money to exist, so she dressed constantly in dark shades. The blue-eyed girl with blonde hair could not stand up for herself and continuously avoided noisy company. When she got to the task, she heard a voice. You're not even going to say hello? Looking back, she saw Jason sitting behind her back. Without answering anything, she went on with her assignments. The standings were difficult because her future depended on them. Emma and Barbara decided to fortify themselves at lunchtime as usual. The whole class was sitting in the dining room. A long-legged blonde approached their table and asked a strange question. Are we still on for today? You'll be home by 8 o'clock. So Barbara decided to make some money. The girl used her knowledge differently. She helped underperforming students for an extra fee. They needed homework, and she lacked money. It was all fair. Jason decided to take advantage of this, and, conspiring with a friend of Barbara's, was awaiting for her in the apartment. The tall blonde went off to the pharmacy, leaving Barbara alone with him, and Jason locked the door from inside. It ended very badly for the girl, because Jason never tolerated rejection. He attacked her and took her by force. After the incident, the girl's world collapsed into a rattle. She was afraid there would be rumors at the university. The case will be loud and will not be punished anyways. She promised herself she wouldn't say anything to anyone. Barbara did not report him to the police, as the father of the rapist was a mighty man. There was no point in fighting him. With ragged mascara on her face and pain in her heart, she strode through the dark streets, avoiding people on car headlights. In addition, that evening, Grandpa was taken to hospital with another heart attack. The doctor said he'd been rescued at the ICU, but any stress could kill him. A green-eyed Mary in a white robe suspected that something terrible had happened. She offered help, but crying, Barbara refused. At home, she tried to forget all the horror that had befallen her. The rivers of tears ran down her cheeks, but even they could not wash away the shame. For a month, the girl did not leave the house. She constantly put on a hood on the street and was hidden from the eyes. Her grandfather was discharged home. At the next tea party, the older man's attention was drawn to the fact that his vast appetite ate chocolate cake. Barbara, when did you have time to love chocolate cakes? I don't know, she answered. Because in our family, only your mother loved it when she was pregnant with you. Well, I'm my mother's daughter, Barbara grinned, but her thoughts said otherwise. She drove them away all night. The following day, she couldn't stay at home. Grandpa was discharged from the hospital. Now he was at home, so he would immediately suspect an accident and molest with questions. After a whole month of missed lectures, Barbara decided to study. She was so hoping for the support of her friend Emma. She wanted to tell her how it was going, but something was in the way of stopping. She thought it was not the time yet. She walked into the classroom and saw Jason in the company of that girl's. Her eyes filled with tears of shame. She hated him, blamed herself. It was my fault, she kept telling herself, with her face gleeful and a finger pointed at her. Jason continued to tear her heart to pieces. Despite this, she continued to walk and keep her head up high as possible. Unable to withstand the pain, she fell unconscious right before him. A month later, it turned out that Barbara was pregnant. She tried to have an abortion, but the doctors did not advise her to do so because of her rhesus factor. In the future, there might be a possibility of not having children. Barbara, desperate, did not know what to do. Professor William heard about the incident from a close friend of Emma's and immediately convinced her granddaughter not to do anything stupid. He didn't care about the details, and he was glad Barbara was having a baby. When the girl's mother died in childbirth, it was because of the consequences of a failed abortion that her father forced upon her at a young age. After Eva's birth, her grandparents and Emma helped Barbara, who took care of her daughter unwillingly. She couldn't stop thinking about the circumstances under which her daughter had been conceived. She felt she was failing as a mother. One day, Jason found out that Barbara had given birth, began to intimidate them. He didn't want people to know he was the child's father. William had become witness to the scene, and his heart had broken. He had passed away. Barbara was left all alone with her child. She struggled through grief and realized she could not cope with a daughter who cried endlessly. Then, she left the stroller with Eva near the children's clinic. Along with the child, she put a note there, asking her to take care of the baby, and indicated her name. It was 7 long years after the tragedy. Barbara worked as a secretary at the bureau and was married to Simon. The man was hurrying with a wedding, but Barbara constantly stalled the process. The man felt that a concrete wall had grown between them. The bride was closing more and more against him every day. The concrete wall was her past, which the young man knew nothing. Simon didn't think she was sneaking around to watch her daughter grow up. She kept an eye on her life and gave her birthday gifts through her best friend. Emma worked at a charity foundation, so it was easy for her to see Barbara's daughter. Eva's fate was miraculous. She was adopted by the head of the children's fund, John and Mary Snow. Barbara understood the complexity of the situation. She couldn't just take her daughter away from her a few years ago. To do this, she had to take the baby by force. In order to not cause stress to the child, she had to find a way out. The woman decided to go rogue and play child psychologist and many nanny roles simultaneously. So she came into the family and started living with her little girl under the same roof, presenting herself as a child specialist. It seemed all the troubles were over, but Jason came out of nowhere. The guy came to John's house. He said he was the daughter's birth father and asked for a substantial amount of money to get rid of their biological mother. Mary Snow realized this was the only chance to get rid of Eva's biological mother once and for all. Jason conspired with Mary Snow to get rid of Barbara for a decent sum. One day in an argument, John Snow decided to kick his wife out of the house. As a result of the quarrel, Eva learned that she was their adopted daughter. In tears, she ran to her room. A desperate father threw everything into letting the young lady know he loved her madly. Mary could not understand why her husband had allowed Barbara into the house and treated her so well because she was a servant. There was no end to her jealousy. She feared Barbara would take away her husband. One night, a message arrived on Barbara's phone with an address. She drove there without slowing down. The door was left open, and when she came in, she saw Jason lying in a pool of blood, the knife handle sticking out of his chest. Frightened, she called the police. As the only witness, she was detained until the circumstances were clarified. The interrogation revealed that the prints on the knife were left behind when Jason tried to pull out the knife. Barbara wouldn't let him do it because he could have bled out and died before the doctors arrived. Even though he was cruel to her, she fought for his life to death. A small silver earring was shown to Barbara in the hopes that she was the owner of this taming. The girl couldn't remember when she saw the object. Sometime later, she called John, claiming that this jewel she saw on his wife Mary, and asked for his help. John remembered that this evening his wife was away somewhere. When she came home, she was confused and pale as snow. She went straight to the bathroom, where she spent quite a while. By juxtaposing all these facts, John began to rummage through her things in the hopes of finding a second earring. But the woman took care of it and got rid of the evidence. Out of desperation, John rushed to review his wife's photos on social media and found evidence implicating his wife. It was a deer horn earring. John persuaded his wife to confess to him during a quarrel to extract a confession of murder and clear the name of an innocent girl. At that time, the audio recording was turned on. It turned out that Mary was once again jealous of her husband, and she had planned things with Jason. He agreed. After all, the proposed amount clouded his mind, but the greedy lad couldn't resist the charming Mary during their secret meeting and plotted the same illegal acts, trying to rape her the same way. The woman broke free and grabbed the first thing she could. It was a knife. Then she sent a message to Barbara's phone, so she decided to get rid of her adopted daughter's mother and her rival. Poor Barbara, unaware of the plot between the two, rushed to the crime scene. The next day, John handed the recording to the investigator. Mary was locked up in prison. Barbara and John returned to Eva. Now their daughter's well-being was in their hands. No one stood in their way. "Hello, little girl. I know that it will not be so easy for you to forgive me." With these words, she turned to her 8-year-old daughter. Her tears seemed to choke her. She got out an album with pictures of all 7 years. With her shaking hands, she opened it. Those pictures captured her most vivid moments from the childhood of the little princess. Eva burst into tears and hung on to her mother's neck. Barbara, Eva, and John became a real family.